Hi, Rabbi Kornblau, and hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session in which we're going to pose and ask Rabbi Kornblau to deal with a very difficult question. We've heard some Orthodox rabbis, experts, scholars, activists talk about their commitment to climate and climate justice, but it is the case that we don't see this as a widespread phenomenon through the Orthodox community. And so our question for Rabbi Kornblau today is going to be, where is the Orthodox community in the climate movement? For anyone who knows anything about the Orthodox approach to climate and climate justice, you know who Rabbi Kornblau is. He is one of the original activists in this area, and we're so grateful for him to be here. We have kind of limited time today, so I'm going to very briefly introduce Rabbi Barry Kornblau, who has been the rabbi. Please, everyone else, mute yourself.
And take that with you.
Rabbi Kornblau has been rabbi of Young Israel of Hollis Hills in Windsor Park in Queens, New York since 2003. For a dozen years, he served on the rabbinic staff of the Rabbinical Council of America. He's also worked for Canfei Nesharim and its successor, Grow Torah, educating Orthodox Jews about environmental issues from Torah and scientific perspectives. I would say he's been active in this area for over 20 years. And we had a nice conversation the other day in which I asked Rabbi Kornblau just this question and listen to his answers, and I can't wait to hear him review them again, and then we'll ask him what we're going to do about this. But let's begin with the first half of the issue. Where is the Orthodox community in the climate movement?
I'd like to thank you, Jack, and everybody else who put together and has spoken on this conference. It's been really refreshing to hear so many different ideas. And many familiar and some new. I was not expecting to have this little piece of my comment, but as I listened, it dawned on me that I'd like to share my own little piece about how to think about these issues very broadly. And so with your permission, I want to not answer your question right away and instead quote a few key words from Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. One of the volumes which has come out of his writings is entitled The Emergence of Ethical Man. And in the first few chapters of it, Rabbi Soloveitchik openly takes on a central question, which is the anthropocentric view of the Torah, as well as halakha, which is founded on it. And so by way of introduction to my self-interruption, I'll say that I think that the previous conversation shows that the pursuit of a halachic approach to this issue is fraught with fundamental problems. Wherever you turn, there are issues. And I think that fundamentally we have an ancient Torah, and there are limits to the kinds of sources and ideas that are found in them, and specifically of halakha. Halakha is rooted primarily in its full flourishing in our exilic experience, and fundamental to that experience has been to be a landless people. One of the earlier speakers mentioned the Gemara in Baba Kama, which talks about the takanot of Yehoshua, the prophet Joshua, who, upon entering the land, established various rules by which the land was going to be used. And what is striking is that as soon as the Jewish leader became responsible for an actual piece of real estate, suddenly there was the need to address extremely practical things about water sources and bees and all sorts of other similar matters. How exactly shall we fish or not overfish or not get in one another's way in the Sea of Galilee, and many other such matters. And the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch points out that there's no reason why any of these rules should apply only to the land of Israel, and instead they should apply even in Chutz La'aretz, everywhere where there are Jews. But as he writes very clearly in Choshen Mishpat, he says, it's not common for Jews to own land. And we, Americans, think that it's normal for Jews to own land, but that's not actually true. Historically, Jews have been the rootless cosmopolitans, and we've been rootless, quite literally, in many places, very disconnected from the land. And so our whole civility, our whole culture is one that's divorced from the land, and it shows in many of our sources and in most ways that most Jews who actually live inside of Orthodox culture function. So to address that, one needs to develop a sense of being rooted in a place. One activist says, act like you live here. But Jews don't typically act like they live here. They often feel like they are both living in a place as well as not living in a place with their eyes towards redemption. And so I think that halacha and our sources need to be amplified by a moral argumentation, specifically as a general matter. What kinds of moral arguments can we make that are not specifically halachic in nature? And specifically, how can we go after the anthropocentrism which is at the core of the gigantic holes in Baal Tashchit and so many of the other halachot. And in investigating that issue over many years, I delved into the thought of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Rabbi Cook Sr., and most specifically, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who I mentioned, penned the essays which are now published under the title of The Emergence of Ethical Man. And he takes it on. He says, I know that I'm taking on all of Jewish tradition. Fundamentally, I think that when one examines the text, one discovers, and I'm quoting now, earth, nature, and man flow into each other. There is complete identity of man and earth. Let us not forget that by the word earth, we understand not just the land, but nature as a whole, the entire complex of physical conditions that make man's existence possible. As an organism, he depends on his surroundings, and this spells ontic unity and uniformity. Obedience to God means, V'natati gishmechem b'itam, I will give you rain in their land, and disobedience, I will make your skies like iron, and so on. The words of the Tochacha in the end of Sefer Vayikra. And he goes on and elaborates that instead that we have to conceive of our relationship with nature as not one of dominance, but one of partnership, one of cooperation. And he makes the radical statement at the end of chapter 3 that, that sometimes nature shows that it hates man, and we need to watch out for that. Well, guess what? Nature is making it very clear that it hates man right now. In the world, in all of the things which our earlier scientific presentations made, and the current events which we read about. And he concludes by saying that there's a redemption aspect here. The reunification of man and earth as a whole ontic entity, as a unified thing, bears political significance, which is that the state cannot be reduced to social interrelationships alone, but must be extended to the mystical communion of man with nature, the renewal of an old friendship, reconciliation between man and, hold your breath, Mother Earth. Mother Earth is usually exactly the type of idolatrous language which repels religious thinkers. And I didn't say it, Rabbi Soloveitchik said it, and he knows exactly what it means. What he's saying. And the state is charged with trying to address these issues. Those are the things that I didn't plan on saying that I'm saying anyway. I think ultimately in that mode of thinking is the root of the problem and the root of the kind of Jewish solution that we need. To address the specific question that I was asked the number of reasons why the vast majority of Orthodox Jews, even in the YCT community, are not here, never mind in the broader community. Well, the answer to that question is what we call vastly overdetermined. There's so many factors pushing against Orthodox involvement in this area that it's only by addressing those larger issues that we'll see significant progress. I don't want to be totally pessimistic. A study by Canfei Nesharim, as well as by Nishma, recently highlighted that for many Orthodox Jews, particularly those, the minority of us who voted Democratic, climate issues and environmental issues are actually quite high priorities. And those people, shall we say, are already on board. But for the vast majority of our co-religionists, that is not true. And I've already highlighted several reasons. One is our exilic experience, our not being rooted in place, the anthropocentrism, which is at the roots of halakha. And then I'd like to add a few more as well. First of all, green issues, shall we say, are universal issues. They're not specifically particular to the Jews. And therefore, one thinks that either they're the province of non-Jews, let the non-Jews take it, or they're the province of the liberal streams of Judaism who are obsessed in the Orthodox view with universal views. And therefore, we pull away from things that are universal in nature. And green issues are, of course, the ultimate in worldwide issues that are not specifically Jewish in cause or in solution. For others, they say that universal issues are important. These are Orthodox people. But since Goyim and or the non-Orthodox groups are paying attention to them, we Orthodox Jews need to focus our immediate concerns and constrained resources, attention, mental bandwidth, and so on concerns that are specific for our community. And all of us being part of that community know that that list is quite long. There are a number of other issues as well. Extreme reads from the secular community of environmentalism are correctly understood by many of our co-religionists as fundamentally being a new religion. And in most presentations by Orthodox Jews, the first thing that comes up is, oh, we have a competing religion. It's called environmentalism. And that actually is true. At the extremes of environmentalist thought in the general world are people for whom this is the whole way they think about everything. And clearly as Torah Jews, we can't do that. And we should not do that. That we don't think is the will of God. Having said that, it's an error to think that extreme views in any group represent the majority view. And that's an error that our community makes in many areas. It looks out in the world, sees extreme views, misses the moderate views, and is repelled. So that's another issue. Yet another concern is that overall, we are tradition. And many of the earlier speakers spoke to that, which is a sense that the status quo is normative. We have a conservative bias. Kol ha'mishaneh yado al ha'tachtona. If you want to make a change, it's up to you to explain the basis of that change and why you want to make a change. We generally think that's a good thing. But in the face of a global crisis, where many have come to the realization that fundamental changes are needed, it's really hard for traditionally oriented Jews to come to the realization that, holy cow, our traditional way of thinking of status quo is the way to go, is the appropriate way to think about things. I'd like to highlight a few other issues as well. It's taken for granted in the present conversations here that science is to be granted credibility. Over and over again, my experience in speaking to various Orthodox Jews and groups and reading what other folks have to say in the broader Orthodox world is that that's not true at all. And we have fundamental problems in our texts. Specifically, the early chapters of Genesis suggest the age of the universe is 5,700 some odd years, that there is no evolution, and that man is the pinnacle of all of creation. And that certainly is, as Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out, the normative view and distinct from the rest of creation and ruling over it. Those sources are real, and they really inform the worldview of many people in our Orthodox communities broadly writ, and they drive suspicion of science in general, particularly if it's not technological in orientation or practical. And there is an aspect of modeling as well as recreating the past, which is part of climate science. And those things are triggers, shall we say, for many of our co-religionists. I was surprised to hear the end of the story of Noach being quoted as a potential source of climate activism. Overwhelmingly, our community looks at that story and says, God promised never to flood the world again. Therefore, that and many other similar verses imply that God will never let everything become ruined again. He won't even let things become a little bit ruined. And it must be that Earth is fundamentally stable, and so on and so forth. And there are many verses which indeed sound exactly like that. Struggling with the question of literalism versus not literalism, how to adjust understandings of biblical texts in light of modern science and so on is a huge issue. And it's one which off in some parts of the modern Orthodox community we take for granted, but for large parts of our co-religionists, that's not true. Additionally, yet another area is politics. I already alluded to the fact that the Nishma Jewish Orthodox research group recently did a study comparing the priorities of Jewish Trump voters and Jewish Biden voters in the most recent election. And that gap is quite significant. And practically speaking, for a whole slew of reasons which are beyond the scope of this conversation, politically, many Orthodox Jews conceive of themselves as being conservative or Republican or libertarian or other such ideologies and political affiliations. And they see green issues as being liberal and democratic. And in the United States, that is an accurate thing. It's clear that there's a very strong difference between the parties on this area, although thank God, among younger conservatives and younger Republicans who realize that the world really is changing, and therefore really government and individuals are going to have to do something about it, are starting to get on board in the younger generation. Another problem that's specific to that is that if you're of a libertarian, conservative, and Republic mindset, then in general, the idea that large-scale problems require governmental solutions, big government and regulations and policies, well, you're allergic to that from an American political point of view. And not only that, but from an Orthodox cultural point of view, we live in a culture where many still conceive of the American government as being democratic, yes, but fundamentally suspicious and to be kept as far away as possible, because our historical, especially Ashkenazi, but also Sephardi experience with governments is that they're the bad guys. They cause problems for us, and we need to manage them and keep them far away. And so we have a Jewish culture, an Orthodox culture specifically, which has a suspicion of government and which astonishingly has suspicion of experts, even though halakha generally relies on experts, mumchim in different areas. We saw that even broke down during the recent pandemic, as so many, but not all, thank God, in our Orthodox communities cast aspersions upon scientific experts, medical experts, even at the cost of their lives, their community's health, and so on. There are a variety of other issues as well, but these are the biggies that I've seen over time. And even the framing of this little session, where the Orthodox Jewish climate activists is way past where most Orthodox Jews are. We're not up to being activists. We're up to taking the scientific realities seriously. We're up to struggling with our internal texts and with some of the deeply rooted assumptions of those texts, as well as the culture in which all of us Orthodox Jews live. And it's not surprising that it's folks like me and others who are profoundly committed to Torah and Halakha and all the other good things that we do are often not reared in the Orthodox world and have a different perspectives on these things as a result, because they don't share some of those cultural assumptions and the like. Those are some of the thoughts that I had about this, and now I welcome comments and so on.
I'd love to hear some comments, so please put them in the chat or just speak right up, because we have a nice sized group here. And while people are doing that, this conference in and of itself does give us some reason to think that there is some, at least organizing it's in some parts of the Orthodox world toward climate awareness and climate action. Where do you see this going, Rabbi Kornblau? What do you think we can do? What will happen next?
Somebody raised their hand. I'm not sure how to.
Okay, let's see.
It was. I don't remember.
I know how to do the chat, but I don't know how to retrieve questions.
There it is. Here, it's Manny Kingsley. So can you speak, Manny Kingsley? Unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted. I come from Melbourne, Australia. Well, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, listening to this. I can say this, that there are very few Rabbonim who would have had access to a Rosh Yeshiva who actually indulged and involved himself in climate issues. The majority of our Rabbonim are, if they're Orthodox, even from the Orthodox left towards the extreme Orthodox right, which there are many in Melbourne, Australia, have no involvement with the literature and with the communities which discuss these issues on a serious level. This is the first time I've actually heard about Rav Soloveitchik's writing on this particular issue. And I'm amazed and I'm very gladdened by it, but I can say that the communities here in Melbourne, I can't tell for the rest of Australia, but the communities here in Melbourne are more self-defensive about preservation of their existence, of their own communities, let alone the rest of the world, and let alone the rest of Australia. And I think one of the questions is, Bishvili Nivras Ha'olam, they were given the world to participate in we have to be guardians of the world. And no one discusses that. No one talks about it. I don't even see it in Tradition magazine.
If one reads Rabbi Soloveitchik's essay, Confrontation, which was written in response to Nostra Aetate in the early 1960s. What?
Nostra Aetate, yes. I have it.
You can see in Confrontation that he knows that there's a big world of concerns, and he writes explicitly that, what did you want from us? You were busy killing us and oppressing us and making us second and third class citizens. Of course we weren't involved in the big wide world and its decisions and the issues facing it. If we had raised our voices, no one would have listened anyway. And so that's a deep cultural heritage that we have. And it's one that, frankly, that is hard to break out of. A great deal of orthodoxy operates from a defensive crouch. It's focused on external threats and organizes around those threats. The idea of proactive leadership on matters of consequence not directly related to the community is simply, as I said already, quite alien to Orthodox culture as a whole. My ultimate thinking to answer, I believe, Jack's question about what to do is that the root issues of our community relate to the sudden fact that we have power. We have power in Israel. We have power here in the United States. We're not very good at thinking about how to use power. We assume that we're powerless. And we look to halakha to find whether we have a formal chiyuv. I remember debating with Rabbi Jeremy Weider, Shlita of Yeshiva University, about this vigorously a number of years ago. And he said, give up on halakha. Halakha is never going to solve this problem. It needs to be the arguments and issues here need to be made on a moral basis, and we need to get used to speaking in moral terms about these kind of issues. He and I have gone on to speak about those things as well. To me, the broader need is to have a movement within our community, building upon the many people who, thank God, already understand that we have power, we can exercise power, we need to care about the broader world from a hashkafic as well as a practical reason. The state of Israel, much like Yehoshua, now that it's actually in charge of a piece of territory, understands as a matter of course that of course we have to take care of the things that are within our borders. And lo and behold, what goes on outside of our borders also matters, because it drives wars and foreign policy issues and creates enemies all around us. 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of hearing Ambassador Gidon Bahar, who is Israel's ambassador to focus on in the environment and sustainability. And he pointed out that unlike in the United States, the science and the basic facts of things and the need to be responsible is not really subject to partisan debate. Whatever team you're on, you understand that you're in charge of a country, and that country has international responsibilities as well as its national responsibilities as well. And messing with the science isn't going to get anywhere. The state of Israel excelled in the early parts of the coronavirus precisely because they took the science seriously, because they have to. Because that's what reality is. Here in this country, the Orthodox community has yet, as I mentioned, to come to terms with the power and the science and the reality, or rather big chunks of it, big chunks of that community, and that's kind of where we are. I see Susan is raising a hand. So Susan, just unmute yourself and talk.
There we go. Oh, hi. Thank you so much for Kornblau for your presentation. I had never thought about the exilic capacity. I mean, that idea of us not having a government born in America. I guess I see it a little bit differently. I was happy to hear from the man who just spoke from Australia. I just watched an incredible video by a climate systems scientist from Australia. His name is Will Steffen, and he did a film called Anthropocene. You can get it on YouTube. And he explained how all of the different factors overlap, and that this is not old. Like, it's not a conservative thing, because most of the problems that we have now with over-consumerism and overshooting the limits of the world started with Reagan and Thatcher and neoliberalism. So that's a new concept that started in the 80s. And I know this isn't really a religious idea.
I actually have to take issue with that. I don't think particularly that that Reagan and company are actually particularly at fault here. The data show, having nothing to do with religion, but just following the scientific data, that it's the Industrial Revolution that is the driver of where we are, and the export of the Industrial Revolution from Europe around the world is what's driving the carbon and methane emissions, which ultimately is the driver of the greenhouse effect, which is causing so many troubles. We haven't mentioned here issues of deforestation. We haven't mentioned here issues of the dramatic decrease in insect population, and a whole slew of other scientific issues as well. But fundamentally, it's not about partisan politics in the United States. This is a long-term fundamental problem of the West. It was identified as such in the late 1960s in a fundamental paper, which has spawned a literature of its own, called The Sources of Our Ecological Crisis, written by Lynn White Jr. And thinkers who think about this on a large scale understand that the patterns here are very long-standing. The CO2 emissions from the observatory on the top of Hawaii don't change that much in their upward tick. A little bit more for Reagan or a little bit less for Reagan. The pattern's been going on since the 1950s as industrialization has picked up dramatically, and the output and population and so on. And it's a thoroughly modern Western and Western exported problem, rooted in economics, rooted in Western ways of thinking, and it's going to take a lot of work to undo it.
Well, yes, go ahead.
If there's no other Julianne G, go,
Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much to everybody who's spoken, and to Jack for letting me know about this so that I could come. Really, really grateful. I just have a question about, even if we accept certain things like anthropomorphism, or we accept things like the Orthodox community only has to care about things that directly affect the Orthodox community, doesn't the end result of runaway climate change that puts all of humanity at risk of extinction, doesn't that affect the Orthodox community? And that's one question. And then another curiosity I have, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so you can choose what you want to answer, is if you could say something about how you're thinking about deforestation in relation to Jewish law and Jewish ethics and Jewish history.
Let's see. Regarding your first point presupposes that the worldview of the vast majority of Orthodox Jews includes the possibility of large-scale Earth-size events being their responsibility or impacting them, or long-term things affecting concretely what I should or should not do. Right now, I got a mitzvah to do. I got to have over 12.5 people because I'm doing a kiruv thing. My husband doesn't do the dishes. I can't possibly do that many dishes. I'm exhausted. I got to be makar people to do Torah and mitzvahs. So as a result, of course, I'm going to use a ton of plastic because that's what's cheapest. By the way, I don't have a lot of money, and so I'm going to do what comes most quickly. Those are my priorities. If those are your priorities, so the gigantic question of the fate of humanity is just not on your radar. And I'm not here to take a swat to swat at kiruv. I'm not here to encourage people that we shouldn't all keep Shabbos and keep kosher. That's just completely absurd. that's just not any part of my worldview. But those Inyanei Kedusha, which define a great deal of the Torah, are founded, as Rabbi Sachs put it in one of his essays, that the are founded on the fact that we're all going to exist. But very few people think about that. And frankly, it's not just Jews, it's not just Orthodox Jews. Across the world, we struggle with the same thing. We have the entire organized world. The Paris Accords we're far away from getting there. Nations across the world are struggling with the kinds of changes that are needed. I'd just like to end on an upbeat note. Some of the most basic things to do are required to bring bring problems down. I didn't say that in good English. To solve the carbon and methane emissions down, to address deforestation and so on, are some of the very basic things, which is part of your second question, deforestation, are some of the very basic things, which were already mentioned, which is dramatically reducing the amount of red meat which is consumed by individuals and our community. Our culture pushes against that, and we need to try to push back against that culture in an understanding way and limit our basar, especially our red meat, only to Yom Tov, maybe to Shabbos, maybe to a big simcha, but that's all. Otherwise, red meat shouldn't be part of really our lifestyle. Similarly, issues of food waste are huge. If you go to drawdowns.org, and you'll see that in every scenario, getting Western wealthy people like everyone on this call and everyone that we all know to reduce the amount of waste in their kitchens and in their institutions, all of that food waste takes huge resources. And so making sure that we eat our leftovers, plan not overbuy at the supermarket, use all the stuff that we buy. It sounds trivial, but actually multiplied across everybody, it's huge. Similarly, if you live in New York State and other similar states, changing your electric source away from carbon-based fuels to wind and solar, those things are easy to do through Con Ed. You don't have to change your wires. You don't even pay that much more, if anything more, I think, for the electricity. And right away, you're supporting the kinds of changes to our power supply, which are really, really critical. If your roof, like my roof, doesn't really accommodate solar panels, no problem. Just get solar panels from somewhere else where there's room and get that wired into your house. There are many other things as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here, and I look forward to engaging with any of you. If you want to reach out to me, my email is rabbikornblau@gmail.com. Happy to speak with you or your community, and so on and so forth.
And thank you so much, Dr. Kornblau, for being with us.
I'm not a doctor. I'm just Rabbi.
Rabbi Kornblau, forgive me. Rabbi Kornblau for being with us with these wonderful insights that you've offered us. Thank you to YCT for sponsoring our conference, to all the sponsors. And thank you for all of us for being with us tonight. Thank you all, and good night.
Okay, thank you so much, Jack, and thank you again to all.